Well, now that the wind has died down, it's been seriously blowy here, up to 43 kilometers an hour at some points. So we thought, get out in the sunshine. It's going to be a bit of an island amongst the storms, I think, and I'm going to give you the first plot tour that we've ever done. This is the January plot tour then, and we'll show you around the plot and give you some sort of idea of what we've got planned for the coming months and the coming season. So these are the raised beds, no dig beds. The two at the top are a bit deeper because the clay in this area is very close to the surface. So trying to work the ground prior to these beds was really quite difficult. Not a lot of growing depth, and these have made a massive difference. So the paths, I will be doing a video about how I get to this point. As you can see, it's a wood chip, and we're covering over the beds at the moment so that we can stop any rain, and we get a lot of rain here, leaching the nutrients out of the compost and the soil. We've got a few cabbages left which are hanging on in there, and the wind has taken its toll on the remaining sprouts and the kale that we had in those hoop beds. Red cabbage are hearting up strongly. We're not using a lot of those. Debatable whether we'll grow them again this year, maybe just a couple. And then on the left hand side here we've got two brassica beds with high nets, and we've got 1,000 head cow in one and Asturian cabbage in the other, and these last all the way through the winter, feeding us most weeks without any problem at all. The IBC water butts keep the polytunnel well watered during the summer. I'm fortunate that I'm able to run a hose to these and keep the water levels reasonably high. I made this coal frame last year, giving it a bit of a clean out today because it was getting a bit weedy in there, but we're back in control. And that's pretty much this area, and you can see across the plot here we have a fairly overgrown area at the front right, and that's the plot that I took over last summer. There's a lot to do up there, but we're getting on quite well. And this is a much more open bed, 4 strips here. We've got garlic doing very nicely on the left hand strip, and just a few parsnips at the back end. We'll be covering that up soon. We've covered up this next bed. We've got a few leeks left in this one, and then we'll cover that one up, and then the kale just at the back end of this bed, and we'll probably be covering up the other end of this bed very shortly. Down here, disaster bed. We stuck in a couple of cauliflower late in the season. They're doing their best, but not really succeeding. So I think we're going to be stripping that out fairly soon and covering it over with a mulch so that we're ready to use it in the coming season. The brick paths here are reasonably successful. As you can see, there's lots of grass growing in between the bricks, so you can see me having those bricks out of there and putting in some sort of fabric weed barrier. This was the garlic bed last year, originally a strawberry bed, just to keep the birds off the fruit. I caged it, and the garlic in here last year was an unmitigated disaster, so we won't be growing it there again, I don't think. Thinking that I might put sprouts in there, because I certainly need to stake them this coming season. And we've got a water butt here which services this area, and over the last few months it's developed a lean, We're going to have to do something about that. You can see it's on a pretty steep angle, tipping backwards, so we'll get to doing something to sort that out. These bushes, they're very productive, they're very old red currant bushes, and we just prune those each year, and we get a tremendous amount of fruit on them, which is fantastic. This bed originally was a raised bed, but it rotted away, and I think I might get back to making it a raised bed again in the future. For now, it's a mound really. It's covered over with a breathable fabric just to keep the weeds down, and I stripped that back at the end of each season. Did it in about late October, and fill it with new mulch, and then it's ready for the coming season. And I grow courgettes in there, and I've had reasonable success. The holly tree takes some upkeep, just keeping it a reasonable shape. And then walking towards the back of the plot, we have an apple tree which I was given. It's really started to get going now. It needs some serious shaping this year. I did a bit last year, needs a bit more next year. And below it looks a real mess at the moment. Unfortunately, we've got bramble in there which runs rampant, and I need to really dig it out, but it's quite a challenge given the nature of the old black currant bushes that are in here, and they've not been prolific for the last couple of years, so I'm thinking we might need to prune those significantly this year. This area is where I put any surplus material I take out of the ground, whether it be weeds or just soil that I'm trying to shift around. My objective here is to raise it. This is the lowest point on the allotment, and in the winter traditionally it's got very wet, even pools of water, and so the last couple of years I've been raising the level of it. It seems to be doing the trick, so I'll be doing more of that. And we've been taking some fantastic potatoes out of these pots even up till now, which is the middle of January, so I'm going to carry on doing that. The most successful potato I think we had this year out of about 5 varieties was Charlotte, so we're definitely going to grow that again. This is where I've been putting all of the spare compost from the potatoes once I've harvested them, and as you can see it's pretty much full to the top, and I'm thinking that I'm going to use that in carrot boxes, which I hope to make this coming season. Well, my previous videos have covered creating this box. I'll link that so that you can watch that video if you're interested. And this area under this massive tree is useful in that I can create compost, and I use it for shading plants, particularly fruit plants that I'm trying to bring on. And you can see that we've got some growth on the rhubarb there, and these other gooseberry and currant plants will hopefully get underway this season, and I'll move them up to the fruit bed at the top. The chicken coop generates quite a lot of sawdust and chicken manure, and I keep all of that. It all eventually goes back into the ground, so we pile it up and store it in these bins, and gradually it breaks down and gets added to the whole compost mix. The Bramley apples here, they're a bit of a challenge. They're quite mature trees now, but they've suffered badly in the last 2 years from canker. I've been trying to cut that out. Had a reasonable amount of success. I'm hoping this year that the maturity of them will mean that we get more fruit, We had probably a dozen apples in the first year. We're now into about the fifth, and since that first year we've not really had great success. Along the front of the run we've got jostaberries, and they were only put in last year, but they seem to have got going, and hopefully we'll start to see some fruit this season. At the back of the shed we've got some very mature blackcurrant bushes which are fairly productive. Again, I think we need to prune those this year and make sure we get the very best out of them. We run water off of the shed and into these water butts, and that keeps us going for certainly the early part of the season, with the help of the IBC tanks which we saw earlier. I've got plans for this little area. I'd really like to have a wildlife pond, and I think this is where I'm going to end up putting it, although I'm going to have to take out quite a lot of the soil to get an area that's suitable. A reasonable view here of the overall plot, the lower plot with the shed and the two major no-dig beds and the polytunnel. And we'll come back to this area shortly, but firstly we'll look at this section. Now the soil here was so bad that in the end I decided to weed it, pull it all together into two beds and create three paths around it. And I take that black fabric off at the end of the season and mulch it with fresh compost, cover it over, ready for the season to come. And this is used for squash and pumpkins, and actually is very, very successful. I added to it last year strawberries along the right hand side in pots. They were reasonably good, certainly better than those planted in the ground, but nowhere near as good as those that I grew in the polytunnel in hanging baskets. We've got a couple of buckets here, one with Jerusalem artichokes and the other with horseradish. We've had a meal out of the Jerusalem artichokes, and we'll do a video I think probably later on about those and how we handle them. So this area, so this plot was probably not worked now for 5 years. It was my neighbouring plot, and the first year a gentleman came and brought lots of rubble and bricks and wood and all sorts of things, plastic. Obviously had great plans, but actually never did anything. So that filled the plot and made it very unattractive. It went like that for probably 2 years until finally somebody decided that they would work it, and they had great intentions, I'm sure, but it didn't come to fruition, and the plot gradually just got worse and overgrown, and that was causing me a lot of problems because the height of the grass and the weeds in here was just blowing seed over the whole plot and making life more difficult than it needed to be in the other areas. So last year I pitched to take the plot over, as much as anything to try and control the impact that it was having on the rest of my plot. So with a substantial additional area, I had to consider what I can physically achieve. I work, I do this allotment in my spare time. I love it, but time is at a premium, and therefore I needed to consider how best to manage this ground. You can see at the far end a hugely overgrown area which is actually summer fruiting raspberries, and last year certainly they were very prolific. and I hope to tame that, get control of it, and utilize the fact that we've got some great bushes there. I plan to use this middle area for rhubarb and gooseberries, and then I've planted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fruit trees. I've got an additional plum tree to go in, and we had a pear tree which was fantastic last year. I'll cut in an image of the pears so that you can see. So these trees, I will do a video about them. It's quite interesting where they've come from and what they represent, so hopefully I'll be able to show you that shortly. The biggest issue with this ground is that it's absolutely full of couch grass, and there is no short way to resolve that other than digging the bulk of it out. You can cover it with weed fabric, but there are areas on this piece of land where I've attempted that, including that horrible bed with the cauliflower in that I intend to resolve shortly. And that bed used to have a butyl liner from a fish pond in it, down below the soil level, and the purpose of that was to cover the couch grass. And last year, some 5 years on from when I actually planted the area and put down that butyl liner, I lifted it and found almost as much of the couch grass as was there when I covered it in the first instance. So I've convinced myself that there's nothing short of taking it out. So, like those previous allotment users before me, this piece of land represents a challenge, and there's only one way to tackle it, and that is section by section. So when I put these trees in, I spent time removing the couch grass from each of those locations before I planted up the trees, and that's therefore 5, 6 areas that are already sorted. I've done another 2 here, I've started a 3rd there, and bite-sized chunks is the way forward. And as I clear from these, my plan is to put down a weed fabric and to keep control of it, and gradually I'll overcome the challenges that the ground presents. And this area, there's nothing short of weeding it, digging it, and trying to recover it so that it makes some good quality ground for my future plans for gooseberries and rhubarb. This area was a nice idea. I've put lavender bushes into a sunken bed, but unfortunately that couch grass tends to win out all the time, and I therefore put in some wooden planks and some weed fabric to make effectively a container to put the lavender in, and that succeeded for 6 months or so, and then in came the grass again. So last year I took all of that soil out, I renewed it, I took the plants out and I put them back, and there was some risk in that because they may not have survived, but they seem to have coped. But once again the grass is just rampant, and so I'm beginning to come to terms with the fact that this doesn't work. One of the shortcomings of it is that right next to the beds, the grass overflows, covers the edges of the beds, and it's very difficult to get to it, especially when I've got nets on the hoops to protect the crops. So whether it's this year or next year, at some point in the future, I think I'm going to drive a path straight through there so that I can get to the beds from both sides and find some sort of arrangement to utilize the lavender. This little area in front of the polytunnel, it can look quite pretty. I use a couple of old sinks there with some flowers in. The challenge I have is making sure that this hedging, which is a rose hip, is kept away from the polytunnel. These thorns would slice through it, and I have had one instance just here where that happened and we taped it up, but I just need to keep control of this. I put wood chip down here. To be honest, it doesn't last very long. You can see the grass is already growing over it, so I'm going to have to re-wood chip that this year, weed it and get back in control. You can see along the side of the polytunnel I've put a wooden barrier which enables me to strim along that edge without any risk of damaging the polytunnel. That works very well. Finishing off with these old pots. I won't waste this compost, it'll be recycled. This is another bin that's got a lid that's hard to get off. Which is full of spent compost. Again, I'm hoping that I'll be able to use that for carrots in a carrot box or two. I've got a water butt that's got damage to it and doesn't hold water any longer, and I'm thinking that I'm going to slice a bit of the top off and use that also for growing carrots. So that's a summary of the space. There's lots to do. It's great fun doing it, and hopefully we'll get a lot of that done in the winter months, that groundwork, so that we can make maximum use of the spring and summer. Well, I hope you enjoyed looking around the plot for the first time, giving you a full tour, and hopefully we'll do that occasionally so that you can see how it all is progressing. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all. I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.